Leo and Aaron, you brought us this morning the themes of sin and sacrifice, apology and forgiveness, mistakes and guilt, the individual and the collective, blame and responsibility, anti-Semitism, and climate preserving the earth. As I thought about what useful words I could add to your essential teachings today, my thoughts turned to the very first word of the Parsha, Vayikra. The name of the portion and the name of the book. Vayikra means he called, or it called, or someone called, or something called. The subject doesn't come until the fifth word of the sentence. There's just, which is Yud He Vav He, our four-letter name for God, which is also the verb to be. But for a moment there, at the beginning of the sentence, there's just a verb hanging out at the beginning of the book, Vayikra. Someone's calling. And what's strange about this call is that the aleph at the end of the word Vayikra is written smaller than all the other letters. There's actually nowhere else in the Torah that a letter is written small like that. So what's going on? Now already the aleph, which is the first letter of the alphabet, is a silent letter. And like all Hebrew letters, it's also a number. It's the number 1. And now here it's a small silent letter, number 1. You got to imagine that all the rabbis in the world have something to say about this aleph. But what? I listened this year to Me'or Einayim, a Ukrainian rabbi who lived in the mid-18th century, an early Hasidic teacher who was a student of the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid of Mezrich, who founded the Chernobyl Hasidic dynasty. And he reminds us that God is also known as the cosmic Aleph. Because Aleph is one and God is one. God is the Aleph Shel Olam, the one of the universe. And Me'or Einayim says that just like when you bring someone out of a dark room, a totally dark room, into light, you need to expose them to that light little by first cracking the door open very gradually, and then giving them a glimpse of only a tiny sliver of light, and then allowing in more light little by little until you can bring them out into the full sunlight without overwhelming them or blinding them. Just like this, God works with people in the world. God's Aleph, God's oneness, is so overwhelmingly cosmic that God has to shrink in order to be accessed or comprehended by us. Now, in the very last Parsha, at the end of the book of Exodus, we finished making the tabernacle, the Mishkan, to be the place where we could meet this overwhelming cosmic oneness. And God promised earlier that if we were to build this tabernacle, this Mishkan, this tent of meeting, God would come and dwell within us. But of course, the cosmic Aleph cannot come and dwell within a person. It has to get much, much, much smaller, like that first little sliver of light, into a tiny, minuscule Aleph that can be embodied. And so this call that begins the book of Leviticus is the call happening inside of us, the little Aleph that lives within. Me'or Einayim says that this little contracted version of the cosmic oneness is calling to us all of the time. But it's a silent letter. It's whispering in the quietest possible whisper. It already is silent in its cosmic form, and now it's even more silent in its contracted form, but it's very, very, very close, right inside here. Hearing it requires a special kind of listening, a special kind of attunement to the subtle, to sounds so still we doubt they're there. And the problem is that even in the time of the Torah, and even in the time of the Talmud, and even in the time of the Hasidic masters, most people had too much noise around them, too much sound coming at them to be able to hear something so very silent. And if that was true for them back then, before YouTube and Insta and TikTok and Fortnite and March Madness and talk radio and podcasts and playlists, how much more so for us now? But Me'or Einayim insists that we are being called all of the time. We are being called right now. And I think we kind of of know this is true. I think we kind of know that we're being called, that there's something subtle, invisible, and inaudible calling. And the small aleph in the first word of this book is there to get us to recognize or remember what we already know. And Meori Naim says that the small aleph isn't the only kind of call that's calling all the time. There are loud calls happening. They're coming from the tent of meeting. This kind of place, every kind of place where truth is spoken, where voices ring out, appealing to that part of us that senses what is true, what is timeless, what is real. Your voices today, Aaron and Leo, those were the kind of loud calls coming from the tent of meeting. What happens when we hear a loud call like that, something true, is that it stirs the little aleph, the contracted cosmic oneness that's inside, that can't help but vibrate in response. And both of you, whether you knew it or not, were speaking to our little alephs today. When you urged us to take responsibility for ourselves, to do the difficult thing but the right thing, that's the language of the little aleph. So you've given us a charge, both of you have, to own our mistakes, to apologize, to fix them, to take responsibility, interpersonally and collectively, so that we can live right with each other, so that we can live right with all the living things, so that we can live right with the earth. May your loud call stir every little aleph in this room and far beyond. May everyone who's heard your call be moved to listen inward and act outward, so that the world looks just as you told us, just as we all know it should. Can you hear that song?